In watercolor, we use something called masking fluid a lot, and so I'm going to show you that. And many of you are familiar with this. You can just skip ahead to the next part. But this is my favorite masking fluid by a brand called Pebeo, and they call it Drawing Gum. Masking fluid is another name for it. And the reason that I like it is because, for two reasons. First, it is tinted so that you can see where you've put the masking fluid. It's a light blue color and it dries light blue. And so wherever you put it, later you're going to remember that's masking fluid and I need to rub it off. The other reason I like this is because it tends to be thinner than some of the other masking fluid that I've tried. I've tried Winsor & Newton, I've tried the Incredible masking fluid, and that I think that's by Graphics. It comes in a white bottle, and that's good. It's much thicker, and so it comes on kind of gloppy. But with this, I can paint it really thin, and I can even fade it away so that I don't have such a hard edge at the edge of my masking fluid if I want. So that's great. The thing about masking fluid you need to know is that it does have a shelf life. It does eventually kind of go bad. Excuse me, I have a Band-Aid on my finger, so I hope that's not too distracting. But masking fluid will eventually kind of go off, and then it doesn't work as well, and it also can stain your paper. So one way to check for that is just to, well, first of all, to smell it. If it smells off, the way to know is it does have kind of an odor of its own. So when you get it new, kind of, I never tell people to sniff their products, but you'll get a feel for what the smell of good masking fluid is. And if it starts to smell funny, then you just want to get another bottle. I buy these in the smallest bottles that I can because they go off after a while. So this one's 45 ml. I wouldn't recommend getting anything really big because you'll end up kind of wasting it. It sometimes dries inside the cap and it can get kind of gummy in there. So that's okay. It can also dry a little bit inside the bottle. And so as it gets older, you know, it eventually gets kind of gummy and it might smell funny. And then when you put it onto your paper, it might actually leave a stain or some kind of a sort of like a mark where it was. And we don't want that. So using your masking fluid, just kind of watch it, make sure it is still good. It should last for a couple of months. What I do is I keep mine, actually when I'm done, I close the bottle really tightly and I keep it in just a Ziploc bag and I squeeze out all the air. And that kind of prevents it from going bad as quickly, so it extends the shelf life a little bit. And then, to apply masking fluid, you need to use an old brush or a brush that you've dedicated just for that purpose, because it is gummy. It's basically a liquid latex, and it will destroy the bristles of your good brushes if you're using those. So don't use your painting brushes. I actually have... this one is made for masking fluid. It's a masking fluid brush by SAA, and you get a set of 3 of them. I can't link it on Blick because I don't believe they sell them there, but if you Google it, and you can even go to the SAA website, and then you can get a set of 3 of these, but you don't need that. You can just use a cheap brush of any kind that you have laying around. And to protect the bristles of this brush, what I do is I use just a bar of soap. This is just a travel bar that I picked up at Target maybe. And I keep it in this little clamshell packaging that must have been from some product I bought a while ago. And it just is sort of like this little dish that has a lid. So if the soap gets wet, it doesn't, you know, get all over stuff. I wet my brush. Then I just kind of rub the bristles onto the soap. And I actually get the bristles fully saturated with soap. And don't worry, somehow the soap doesn't affect your watercolor paper later. And then what I do is I dip it in the masking fluid and paint it on. So I'm just dipping my brush in, and then I can paint it right on as though it were paint. And I am very careful when I do this because wherever the masking fluid goes, it will resist the paint. But, you know, tree trunks are very forgiving. They're just natural, and they can have odd lumps and bumps here and there, so don't worry too much if you're painting outside the lines. Now, you don't have to cover the entire trunk, because really you just want the edges protected. But you can go in as far as you want. And you can see how, maybe you can see how thin I'm able to get this fluid to be. So I just paint all the way down. And I also want to paint the top of this slope right here. Just get that all covered up so that I can paint my background trees coming up from there. And that's it. You can paint the center if you want to, just so that it's completely protected, or you can leave it like that and just kind of watch your brush and stop it at that point. Then I rinse my masking fluid brush off really well. I dry it the way I would any normal brush. I also just kind of check and pull off any gummy things that might have ended up there. And that brush is good to go next time. I cap off my masking fluid really tightly. I store it back in its bag. And now all of these supplies can just get put away. This is my little masking fluid kit that I have handy. Now that has to dry for a couple of hours at least until it's actually dry. Sometimes depending on your climate, it might be more humid or it might be more dry where you live, and depending on the time of year. So I just let it dry maybe a couple hours, even up to overnight. And you don't want to leave it on for too long. If you leave it on for days and weeks without coming back to it, then it can end up staining your paper or sticking so hard to the paper that it's hard to remove. And the other thing I don't recommend is using your hairdryer to kind of heat set this, because if you run a hairdryer over that, it may fuse the masking fluid to the paper and it will be a little harder to remove. Now, what you can do is get your brush and I'm going to go over this edge right here, and you can see that I can just be pretty loose. I'm not worried about getting into the tree, as long as I don't let my beads of paint go over the masking fluid edge. If I'm just kind of careful, but I don't have to be so precious as if, you know, if it weren't masked. All right, so these are dry now. So the way that I remove masking fluid, you can either use your fingers and just start to peel it off with your fingers, and it will start to kind of ball up and come off kind of like eraser fuzz. And then you can just kind of do that, work your way down. If you're worried that your hands might have oils on them, I use lotion a lot in the wintertime, or if you may have painty fingers, then you don't want to smudge your painting. So I also use something called, I believe this is called a pickup eraser or a rubber cement pickup or something like that. It's a pretty hard, I don't know what it's made of, honestly. It's kind of like a rubber almost, but it's very hard. And I just run it like this, and it removes the masking fluid just really well. Now I did tear my paper, and I'm glad that happened so I could show you. Let me zoom in for this. Here's the problem. I was not using 100% cotton paper for this project. Just a scrap of cheaper paper to show you this, and so now you can see why I like to use the better paper. Cotton paper would not tear that way. So just be advised, a little bit of a learning lesson for me as well, kind of confirms why I choose better paper. But there you go. So it would have happened probably even if I were using my fingers, but I'll be more gentle now as I go with this side. And you just, well, here I'm tearing it again. I'm going to use my fingers instead. So using better paper is just better all around in many ways. But here it is. That's my one that I did with the masking fluid. This will be the one with the straight edge of the painter's tape. So you just carefully remove that. I try to pull, when I'm removing tape, I try to pull close to the paper, and I try to pull in a perpendicular direction from where the tape was placed. So if the tape is placed vertically, I like to pull horizontally, so I'm making kind of an L shape, and this helps to, and I pull slowly, and it helps to remove it without tearing. Fingers crossed. So that's a tree trunk. It doesn't really look like a tree trunk to me. It really just looks like a stripe, right? And then this is the one where we did 2 halves of tape torn. And to me, that makes a more natural looking trunk of a tree. So there's 3 ways to mask. It is kind of helpful if you don't have masking fluid to use your painter's tape just for this project, because we're just doing straight tree trunks. They don't need to be cut into fancy shapes. So I hope that was helpful. Please ask if you have any questions. Again, I recommend using good quality paper, not the cheap paper, because you can ruin it in many different ways. But let me know if you have questions. I'm always happy to help.